The New South Africa, the New South Institute, NSI, is hosting a discussion on public service reform, which is a crucial step in our nation's democratic journey. South Africa is currently undergoing a historic process of reform. Earlier this year, a significant milestone was achieved when an amendment to the Public Service Act was passed in the National Assembly. This amendment constrains the discretion of politicians to recruit public servants and makes operational decisions in the department. For more on this, I'm now joined by the New South Institute Director, Ivor Chipkin. Ivor, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, ahead of the formation of this government of national unity, as they prefer to call it, there were calls from several quarters for a reduction of the number of ministries and departments. Something, of course, that the president himself had actually promised.
Hi, Brio. I haven't seen. I've been in meetings, and I know that there've been furious negotiations going on while I've been occupied around the format of the final cabinet. But so if it's been announced, I haven't seen those announcements.
Not yet. No, it hasn't. We're all waiting.
Yeah, we're all waiting with bated breath. I was with this morning. We launched, I think, two important reports written largely by my colleague Rafael Leite in our office in Sao Paulo, written prior to the election, actually, but incredibly having foreseen what was going on and announcing a real sort of concrete program of action of public service reform. So we launched that report this morning, and one of the people who was discussing the report with us was Leon Schreiber, who of course is in line potentially to becoming the next Minister of Public Service and Administration if the DA gets that portfolio. So everyone is sort of waiting with bated breath to see what the results are. I would be surprised though if there's a reduction in the number of ministries, given that there are so many parties that need to be satisfied in these negotiations. But I just don't know what's going on.
In fact, Leon Schreiber is an advocate of a smaller and leaner, cabinet and administration. I'm curious to know, in fact, we had tried to approach him, what his stance is now that he, among others, is in line for a cabinet post.
Yeah, you would have to ask him that I couldn't, and I wouldn't dream of speaking for him. What we've been talking about, and this is a very exciting moment to be having this conversation, because I think we're on the cusp potentially of a historic change, not just in the political situation of coalition governments or government of national unity, but also in driving through or forward profound and I think fundamental reforms to the organization of government itself, and in particular the public service and public administration more generally. And if you'll allow me a moment in this regard, we've had since 1994, and of course during the apartheid period as well, profoundly so, we have a highly politicized public administration. And this is not just because of the cadre deployment practices of the DA, but largely by fundamental design. So, for example, the foundational piece of legislation of South Africa's transition, 1994, prior to even to the Constitution of 1996, was the Public Service Act. And the Public Service Act does something quite remarkable in Section 3. It gives ministers at national level, at MECs at provincial level, and the president, it gives them discretion over two key functions. One, recruitment of public servants. So all public servants are in principle political appointments. They're appointed by the politician, and it gives the politicians discretion over operational decisions inside departments. So you have extraordinary high levels of politicization of administrations. We know why. We understand why. The ANC had inherited an apartheid-era public administration. It didn't trust it to implement its policies, and it chose this as a route to retain control over the public administration. So we have that configuration. And at the same time, or very shortly afterwards, South Africa moved to a situation of public management, this idea that we don't want bureaucrats in government, we want public managers, we want powerful, brilliant people in senior positions in government departments who have the autonomy to drive through innovation in their departments, to develop cutting-edge service delivery models, et cetera, et cetera. And here we have the situation that we appointed director generals, deputy director generals, chief directors, who ostensibly was part of this new senior management service that would drive through this innovation. But effectively, their hands were tied because all their powers and functions were held by the politicians. So it's created this fundamental contradiction inside our departments between political control and administrative control. Recently, and really recently, because it happened 2 months ago, a piece of legislation passed in the National Assembly, which goes some way to resolve this contradiction. It's called the Amendment to the Public Service Act. It deals with Section 3 of the Public Service Act, and it effectively rebalances power inside departments away from politicians in favor of senior officials. I think it's a historical breakthrough. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all problems, but it certainly sets us in the right directions. It hasn't been signed off by the NCOP. It needs the assent still of the president. So I think the absolute top of the agenda is the passing of this amendment going in the first instances of the government of national unity, and that's really what we were pushing forward in today's launch. And then putting in favor a concrete agenda of public service reform, starting with how does this new cabinet go about appointing director generals, and we made proposals in this regard. So very, very exciting times, nerve-wracking times, because we are on the cusp of a really historical change, and it could all go awry as well.
Does a smaller, leaner administration necessarily mean more efficiency? So I certainly don't believe so. I mean, I definitely think there are opportunities to where you can improve efficiencies by making them leaner. But in and of themselves, these terms are not necessarily meaningful. There's a sense that the South African public service is especially bloated. When you do the numbers in terms of the number of officials we have relative to the population as a whole, I think some of the economists have done some important work in this regard. Actually, South Africa is not especially bloated. One of the challenges, especially with the cutback in spending in the public service, is that not only do we have lots of key vacancies, but actually the ratio between public servant and citizen has declined in important and fundamental ways, which means in many instances we don't have enough public servants in key positions. So sometimes the crisis of government is not because it's bloated, but because in fact actually we don't have enough people in key positions. So I think we need to be careful of the language of lean and mean and cutting back before we be in the policy space, because I think it can take us down dead ends. I mean, as people who study this space in greater depth, I mean, how do we compare with jurisdictions that are similar to us and with the same or sort of similar challenges?
So I don't have the statistics at my fingertips because I wasn't expecting that question, but they are there and we've done the work on that, and there's some really fabulous papers in this regard. But as a general point, what I can say is that over the last 10 years in particular, there has been a decline in that relationship. In other words, there's a decline in the ratio, the proportion of public servants to citizens in key areas, and that's a real worry. And it goes some way to explain the deterioration. So, comparatively speaking, and I can't remember offhand what those ratios are, whether it's 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 1,500. Those ratios are important, but relative to other countries, and especially to other countries on the African continent, our ratios have deteriorated. In other words, we have too few people often in key positions, especially in those positions facing the public. So I'm very cautious around conversations around the bloatedness of the public service. I don't think that's our fundamental problem. I think the issue more is around getting the right people into the right positions, and especially dealing with questions of the politicized character of many of our administrations. Those seem to me the areas which are propitious for real reform, and where we can start really improving the performance of the public service, rather than on questions of numbers and bloatedness, etc.
Ivor Chipkin, thank you very much for your time.